tied together, and that radiation, how it moves, what the patterns are, what happens, and why we need concern worldwide about all the existing nuclear power plants. So he commissioned this opera to be done. It's multimedia, so Arnie was on film, Dr. Vergeiner was on film, different people in the Pennsylvania area, the area of 3 Mile Island, who have cancers from the nuclear plant were on film, and they were talking about what they went through and what their health issues are and how little support they've had ongoing. And there was music, wonderful music, and just a whole storyline from a dramatist about our responsibilities to the Earth as citizens of this planet. So it was a really interesting take that they came up with, and they got the funding, they did the opera in 2 locations, 2 premieres. One was in Germany in Munich in March, and we had been invited to that one and couldn't because of some testimony Arnie had going on. And then we had been invited last October, you know, this early, when Arnie was filmed, for the premiere in Rome. And so we had committed that we could make that, and we went over. And it was just an amazing production, amazing contacts around that. Arnie and Dr. Shirin Ebadi, who was a Nobel Peace Prize winner from Iran, on peace movement, on protecting women and children, and on not using depleted uranium in the world because of health effects. And again, that DU is used on warheads, and then it ends up spreading everywhere, this uranium, and it's very carcinogenic. And what does that do to the children and families living there, pregnant women, and any soldiers in proximity who then get that in their DNA? And then Arnie spoke about the accident from Fukushima Daiichi, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and what came out from that. And he spoke about operating nuclear plants and the constant radiation that they give off. So it was just, they did a press conference at the Italian Press Club, and they did a symposium before the opera itself.
Mm. And was all this part of another event?
It was sponsored by the Italian Philharmonic that had brought them over, and by the International Peace, I can't say the Italian name for the organization, I apologize, I'm not fluent in Italian, and that organization set up the symposium and the press conference.
Could you refresh my memory and the viewer's memory, Arnie, about the depleted uranium, how that originates? Where does it come from?
Yeah, that's a weapons issue and not a nuclear power issue, but uranium in the ground is 99% uranium-238 and a little less than 1% uranium-235. So you need the 235 to run a power plant, so there's a process where that's enriched to 5 or 6%, and the uranium that's 238, the 99% becomes 99.8% or something like that. That's called depleted uranium. It goes from 99% to almost 100% uranium-238.
So you're actually saying that you need the nuclear power plants in order to get this depleted uranium?
Yes, you use the leftovers from the nuclear power plant to produce the depleted uranium. Now that's basically a waste, except that now the military uses it in weapons. It's used in high-velocity rounds from like the M1 tank. And what makes it a great weapon is that it is pyrophoric. And what that means is that when the particle hits, it doesn't need an explosive warhead. The friction is enough between the metal and the uranium is enough to cause the uranium to spontaneously explode. So it doesn't need TNT or some sort of explosive warhead. But the problem is that it atomizes the uranium, and of course uranium is radioactive, And these incredibly small pieces of radioactive uranium wind up being volatilized as a gas and inhaled by the soldiers and by the people in the war zone. So our soldiers, Iranian soldiers, Afghan soldiers are breathing in the uranium dust from the explosion caused by the depleted uranium pellet.
If there were no nuclear power plants, the governments would continue getting depleted uranium. Isn't that so?
I think that depleted uranium is, from the government standpoint, is a great way to get rid of something that would be a waste. They've got an opportunity now to put it into a warhead as opposed to put it back into the ground or dispose of it another way. Of course, the problem is now when a tank or something explodes from a depleted uranium warhead, that tank then has to get taken back to the United States and disposed of as nuclear waste because it's contaminated with this volatilized uranium.
My personal opinion is that it's a violation of the Geneva Convention, that it's really wrong to use these weapons, that people who inhale the volatilized uranium are being killed 20 years later or 25 years later, and it's just terrible. And that it's pyrophoric, as Arnie said. You can't put it out. The fire can't be put out, and if you spray water on it, it gets hotter, and it continues burning more. So it's just a terrible misuse, and I think is a horrible liaison. It shows the horrible connection between the military-industrial complex and the nuclear industry, and to keep this chain going. And that's my personal opinion.
The Geneva Convention says it's okay to shoot somebody and kill them. That's war. But what happens with a depleted uranium warhead is that the person may die 20 years later from the radiation exposure they received. And that's outside of the bounds of the Geneva Convention.
Well, when we decided upon the topic for our program today, we said, what is the link? So let's cut to the chase on that. What is the link between 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima Daiichi? We're talking about a time frame of 30 years.
When I knew Fukushima Daiichi was melting down, I told Maggie, I cannot, personally, I cannot let this get covered up like 3 Mile Island did. And I could see it already happening on the very first day. The government of Japan was denying the severity of the accident. Well, the same thing happened at Chernobyl, and the same thing happened at 3 Mile Island. So the government's first reaction is to deny the severity of the accident. That worked at 3 Mile Island, and it worked at Chernobyl because we didn't have the internet. And now, of course, we have the internet, and Maggie's gotten this website going, the Fairewinds site, and we've been able to get information out to the Japanese as well as to Americans. But I think, in my heart, most importantly, it's gotten out to the Japanese that talks about just how severe this accident was. We were telling the Japanese 7 weeks before their own government admitted it was as bad as Chernobyl. We were telling that to the Japanese. So number one is the government will try to cover up unless there's an alternative media available.
And the cover-up includes the action, or the actions taken and not taken. For example, the evacuation of the people from where the Fukushima Daiichi disaster happened. Could you talk about that, please?
Yeah, I was on CNN saying you've got to evacuate the women and the children out to 50 miles, and the Japanese were saying, well, you've got to evacuate them out to about 6 miles. So they deliberately kept people in their homes instead of telling them to head to areas that were uncontaminated. And in addition, in Japan, their calculations showed a highly radioactive plume moving to the northwest. And the government knowingly evacuated